Hello, my name is Trey Vital. Today we're going to be doing a dynamic FK switch. I will be doing a significant amount of hand holding just for people who aren't too familiar with Maya. I want everyone to be able to get this, but a lot of that's going to be towards the tail end of the tutorial. So all the heavy stuff I'm going to put up front, and we'll get right into this. So PCC, I'm actually going to be practicing on an asset that I built. Alright, so we're going to be using this guy, Concept by Brittany Flynn. I'll put that in the comments. Anyways, we're going to be putting the dynamic on the spine of the leaf. These are actually going to have end cloth on them later, so they won't be moving with our system, but this is going to be our main focus. So let's take away everything we don't need. Let's drop the character, bring this back, and we are going to hide anything we don't readily need. There we go. Okay, so I will be going over joint placement too. To start off, we're going to be doing, come on, middle mouse button, work for me. There we go. Nope, there we are. Okay, so joint placement is kind of a big thing. Not only where you place it, but how you draw out the chain can be very helpful. So what I like to do is just start my first joint, and then I'm going to hold Shift and select every other place that I want it to do, or want it to go. Don't worry about the size of the joint, it only matters where the center of it is. That's all it's going to affect, and we can change the size of the chain after we draw it out. Just mainly get where you want your deformation to be, and then we'll put an end joint there. Alright, so first things first, let's see what this is oriented like. We can come over here, and all you gotta do is zero this out in the waist joint. We'll mimic the orientation of the chain before it. Alright, so we're going to select the hierarchy. Oops, wrong one. Select hierarchy. And then we can come over here and just drop this down. That's fine. Let's center this a bit more. We can just constrain it over here. There we go. Alright. Now it looks good in this axis. Now what this does is this locks in our orientation. We don't have to worry about any kind of like offset. You can actually see that if you set it to object mode, our x-axis and our z-axis will be all facing the exact same way. This is exactly what we want. So let's get it into position. These are going to just be a few little subtle movements. Nothing too big. And if you guys are doing this on like a tail or even like hair or anything that you're going to apply this to, usually you model those out straight so you wouldn't have to go through this step. But for anyone who has any like slight curves in there, you can just follow this and just apply the same technique. But it does make it a lot easier if you model with the rig in mind and just keep any kind of like I said, tail or like any kind of hair or even like cloth. If you're going to have anything on the side of the character or on the back of them, just model those out straight and then let this thing do its job. So now we're going to go through and make sure that we clean up the chain. For anyone who doesn't know, the root can have translates in any direction, but nothing should have rotates, and everything that follows the root should only have translates in X and also nothing else. So we're just going to come to the top here, and we're going to freeze the transformations. Now we're just going to go pick walk down the chain, and what I'm doing is selecting the root joint, and I'm just pressing the up and down arrow keys. And you can just walk down the joint chain, and everything is clean. We are good to go. Alright, I'm actually using a naming script for this next part. This is going to be the bind chain, because we are going to do a switch. We don't want it to be completely dynamic. We want IK or a dynamic FK switch. So coming over here, open up. Alright, so we are going to do the joint rename. Okay, CT leaf. Alright, let's pop this open. Boom. And then we're also going to pad this. I'll go over padding in that script in another podcast, but right now we're just going to try and focus on the actual dynamic FK. Okay, so now what we need is we got the bind, and now we're going to need a chain for the dynamic and a chain for the FK. So when you're doing these, I have another script that just renames everything and puts the suffix as whatever I want it to be. These are really, really basic. CT, leaf, FK. And if you're seeing it run twice, it's because it's not in a function, so it's just importing and reloading. It only happens the first time you use it. Leaf and FK. Cool. And it just went through and named everything for me. Alright. And this is going to be our dynamic chain. Get out of here. I'm just going to call it dyne. You can call it IK if you want. That's fine. Okay, and I like to reorder these for when we actually make the switch. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're just going to attack the dynamic, because that's the main thing we really want to focus on. So everyone who's like been through this process before, this is what you really want to take away from the dynamic FK switch. We're just going to set up the dynamic, and I'm also going to show you how to integrate that into the rest of your rig. So let's just make this seedling. Alright, and now you'll have all of that there. Okay, so to make this dynamic, what we're going to use is a curve, and we're going to make the curve dynamic, tie it into the chain with an IK spline, and then we'll go over how to plug everything in and how to affect the dynamics on the curve to get the desired result. So it's a mouthful, but it's actually not that complicated. So first things first, let's just hide the leaf. Let me put this down actually. Alright, so we're going to hide the leaf. And we're just going to create our CV curve tool. Let's just make sure. Let's set this to cubic. Alright, and all we're going to do is come over here real quick. I get paranoid, I just want to make sure it's clean. Alright, so real quick, press Y to activate the tool again. We're just going to vert snap to the middle of each of these joints. We're going to do this on the waist joint as well. Once we got that, we can call this CT leaf, and let's call it curve. CT leaf curve. Boom. Alright, now here comes the fun stuff. So under in dynamics, we're going to go to in here, and we're going to go to make selected curve dynamic, and the default settings are going to be just fine for us. So you're going to get a bunch of these little things, and we are going to need everything. Do not delete anything. Okay, cool. So this is the dynamic curve. So CT leaf, you can just find that right under the hair system output. CT leaf, let's call it dyne curve or something. Alright, cool. Now what we want is we want that dynamic curve to be the curve we use for the spline. The spline IK, that is. So let's go back into animation. Skeleton. IK spline tool. Let's open that up. Alright, root curve, auto parent curve, that's fine. You just don't want auto create curve on, and everything else should be fine. Now when you use this tool, what you want to do is you want to select the root of the chain and the waist of the chain, and then you want to finally select the curve that you want to affect the chain. So we're going to start here, and we're going to hold command, not shift. You want to hold command and select that other one. And then we're going to find that curve again, and we're finally going to select that. Boom! And we have our dynamic chain. So let's go. Let's call this CT IK, CT leaf, and then let's go IK SPL. I like to do IK and then whatever kind of IK it is as a suffix. Okay, Now from there we're kind of gonna play with this a little bit. But first things first, let's kind of take the curve and unparent it from the chain. It does that automatically. That was what the auto parent curve was. If you have that on, you can just press Shift P and drop it out of that group. And I'm gonna show you how to organize these things in just a bit, because where you group these and where you place them in the system is going to affect if this is going to work or not, and if it's going to calculate when we need it to. So first things first, let's go back to our in dynamics and let's just see if this is working. So in solver, interactive playback, cool. So we have this thing moving. That's fine. We might want to up this a little bit. Let's go to 1,000 and let's play with some of these features here. Command A, and we need one of these things here. There we go. There it is. So it's under the dynamic curve and we want to go to the follicle shape, and the first thing we want is we want this to affect at the base. Now with that, if we go back to InSolver and interactive playback, you'll notice now we're getting that swing and it's not just looking like a bow and arrow. Alright, and we also have more time to calculate. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to group these things and integrate this into the system. So what we really want to look at is this follicle system is kind of, well, it's actually very important. And how we're going to do this with the chain is very important. So first things first, we have this pad and we're going to have this affected by the rest of the rig. So let's bring all of this back. Okay, cool. So we want, let's just say we want this joint chain, this whole leaf, to follow the chest of the character. So what we want to do is affect the driver. Anyone who's taken Cry 1 with me or went to Full Sail, Clavin should have drilled this into your head. We're actually going to use the root joint, not the waist, for this. But we're going to take this as the driver, and we're going to grab the pad as the driven, and we're just going to parent constraint that. Alright, so now the joint chain itself is gonna follow, like everything under this pad, which is everything we're gonna do for our dynamics, our dynamic FK switch. Everything's gonna follow that. However, for the dynamics themselves to follow it, we need to take that same driver and have this parented under it. So we're gonna go child and then, child and then parent, and then we're just gonna press the P key. And that's exactly where it needs to be under this joint. So you can find it pressing F in the outliner, and then you'll notice it's nice and snug under that spine. So what we need now is to just clean up the rest of this. So this is just going to be called control group, and we'll call this leaf dynamics. Alright, and we'll get into some of these properties again later. But right now what we're going to do is we're going to test this, and I'm going to show you that when we move the chest, this should be following, and if it isn't, we're in trouble. Alright, so it's moving. Let me grab this. There we go. So now when we move the character, the leaf is going to follow, and everything's doing exactly what we want it to do. So just remember that hierarchy. It's very important. Also, don't delete history. I know that should go without saying, but I actually made that mistake, and all the attributes that you need to affect this to work right are just gone. They're just flat out gone. So that's the main part for the dynamic. In fact, if you've done any kind of IK-FK switch before, you're pretty much in the clear, and you don't really need too much more of what I'm showing you. But what we're going to do now is actually set up the switch. So the dynamic is good, and we're going to get into some of the properties on the actual dynamic later. As a matter of fact, yeah, we'll do that later. It'll be easier to show you later. So I'm going to hide the dynamic chain now, and we're going to bring back the FK chain. Shift H. Alright, and for this, we're just going to use some basic priming icons. So just primed icons that'll drive the FK chain. So effectively, when this leaf is turned on, oh, I forgot I need to have the Geo. Shift H, boom. Control H. Alright, cool, Geo's on. Okay, so this is going to directly drive the spine of the leaf, just like an FK system should. So what we're going to do is we're going to open this up, and we do have several joints in here, so this isn't going to be your simple, root and elbow for an arm. It's going to be the same concept, just a few more points. So let's just do this. And I have some scripts that are doing this for us, so we're just going to do that. Every time I run it, it always does a double, because once again, not in function. Need to fix that. Alright, boom. So we got that. And I'm just going to press the G key, and I'm going to go down the line and just make sure everything has an FK on it. And this is going to give us that fine direct control. And we're going to omit the waist joint. We don't need that. That's just for orientation. Okay, now what we're going to do, don't hate me, I know a lot of you have scripts to make this a hierarchy. I need to do that. And we're just going to manually drag this. Make sure you're dragging the prime group into the icon above it. That is very important. The hierarchy will make or break you. And if you're doing this from the outliner, you're probably not going to get the right result, because you need to get the child and then the parent, and unless you know how to select that from the hierarchy, or sorry, from the outliner, once again, the viewport, you're going to get it wrong, and it's just not going to give you the desired result, and it's going to mess with your FK chain, which in turn is going to mess with your dynamic, and it's just a big mess. So just do it this way. Keep everything clean. Gosh, this is a lot. Alright, cool. And by the way, I'm just pressing shift when I'm shutting these, so it closes everything. If you hold shift, it'll open everything. But if I did everything right, we should be able to effectively select hierarchy. I didn't do everything right. You can see right there, that should be the last one selected, and it is not. Alright, good. So now we have the FK. So the FK chain's done and the dynamic chain's done. Now we're going to get into making these things work together to affect the bind chain. And this is where things get really fun. Okay, so let's hide this. As a matter of fact, we can bring everything back. Shift H, Shift H, whoa. Shift H, there we go. Okay, so when we're doing these, as far as setting up the constraints that we're going to have drive everything, selection order is very important. When you're doing constraints, it's always driver, or in our case, drivers, and then driven. And you want to select them in a consistent order, because when we get into the SDK, there's going to be a lot of them. Like we saw, it's like, what, 9 or 10 of them we're going to do. So it looks like number 11 is the way. So yeah, we're going to have 10 of these bad boys to put together. So you want to make sure it's consistent. If you don't have a script and you're doing this by hand like me, you know, just having a solid workflow is going to do a lot for you. So what we want is we want dynamic, FK, then bind in that order. So first one, second one here, and what we're going to do is we're going to use an orient constraint, and you guys can actually find that under animation constraints, orient constraint, and we're going to have maintain offset turned on. It's not necessarily needed, it's just we're going to keep it safe. So first things first, dynamic, FK, boom, and then we're going to hit the orient constraint. And then we're going to pop this open so we can see the next one in the list, and then we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and I'm just going to press the G key. This is the repetitive part, so you guys can take a mental break. And once again, this is for people who haven't actually done the switch before. If you've done this, there's going to be a bit more for you guys at the tail end of the podcast, but you guys really don't have to trudge through this. Alright, and now we've hit the waist joint. So what we can do to make sure all this closes nice and neat is just hold shift like I said earlier, and we can pop it back open. And everything that we need for the dynamic switch, or most of the things we need, are going to be right here. All of these are basically saying that both the IK chain, or sorry, the dynamic chain and the FK chain are both affecting the bind. So if we move either one of them, it's going to be split 50-50 in between them, and we just want a nice smooth attribute to slide between them. And we don't want to have this be an on or off switch, because if we do it like a float value and have a 0 to 10, then anything in the middle of those numbers will allow the dynamic chain to subtly affect the bind chain, and then you can get follow through for free. So that's the real magic of having this system. So you don't want it to be on or off, so make sure you keep that in mind. We can make the attribute wherever we see fit, so let's bring back all the stuff we had here. Alright, and let's just pop it in. We could use the center of gravity or the chest control. This already has extra controls on it, so let's do that. So let's just go over here and go to Edit, Add Attribute, and let's just make this displayable, and we will call this, well, okay, let's call this Dyne FK, and it is displayable, boom, and float switch. Alright, let's call it switch. Boom, and we'll go, let's go 0 to 10, just so we have a nice little range to play with. So 0 will be completely dynamic, and 10 will be FK. That naming convention up here, Dyne FK, it's really important you try and stay consistent with that and have this as like a visual marker. It doesn't have to be dynamic at 0 and FK at 10, but if you can see dynamic on the left and FK on the right, 0 on the left, 10 on the right, it's just a really good workflow to get into. Alright, so now let's get to this, let's get to setting it up. So we'll go here. A lot of the windows I use for connections, you can actually access from here. You don't actually have to go up to window or whatever subpalette it's in. I just select the control, just select an arbitrary value over here, and then go to Edit, and we're going to go to Set Driven Key. And then we're going to load this as the driver because we want the switch to effectively drive what's happening. Now we're going to jump into the bind, and let's go here, here, all the way to 10 and load driven, and you'll notice that and select them, so we have all 10 of the things we're going to be affecting right here. Now it's going to get a bit tedious again because we can't select all of them and affect the weights of the constraints, so we are going to have to do this one constraint at a time for the IK and the FK, but it's really straightforward, and like I said, if you haven't done this before, the practice is really going to be good for you. Just make sure you're very consistent. And remember how I told you that the order you select those in is important? You'll notice that as I'm going down, if you look over here, you'll have the dynamic weight on the top and the FK weight on the bottom, and then each one of these constraints is consistent that way. So it's going to make, even though this is tedious, it's going to make it that much easier for us to track what weight we're turning on and what weight we're turning off. So first things first, you can also select all of the things you're influencing from this screen. So if you look over here at the channel box, you select the icon, boom, you have the channel here. So right now we want to affect the switch. Right now the switch is at 0, and we said we wanted the dynamic to be prevalent at that switch. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here, select both of these, because these are what we're going to be affecting, and we're going to turn off the FK, and then we're just going to simply key that. And then that is going to happen a couple more times. And once again, I said this is going to be repetitive, and if you haven't done this before, you want to go through this, especially before you start writing scripts for it, because you always want to think, okay, well, if I get to a company and they're not going to let me import my scripts or I don't have it, you want to know how to do things from scratch so you know how they work. And that'll help your scripting too. And I'm like the worst scripter, so I might edit that part out. Okay, boom, key. Okay. Alright, there we go. And let's just make sure everything looks right, everything's keyed. Usually you don't have this many joints, especially if you're doing a regular IKFK, but it's just good to take a look. Alright, now what we're going to do is, this is very important, make sure you come over to the switch. There we are. And make sure you change the value. I'm just middle mouse dragging in the viewport. Okay, cool. I've made the mistake of not changing the value and just overkeying, and it's painful. It's not hard to fix, it's just, you know, a nuisance. So once again, selecting all of these, I'm just going to invert them, and then key. And all this is saying is, like, now that we're at 10, the dynamic is going to be turned off, and the FK is going to be turned on. Whoa. Yeah, don't key anything you don't want to. Alright, and once again I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I felt like I might have overseen one, but I'm really paranoid like that. Alright, sometimes that paranoia is good. You always want to test things. Alright, cool. So everything should be working just fine now. So let's see how this is going to look. Alright, so with just the joint chain, let's go over here, and we want FK mode. This is perfect. So we're going to come over here, and we're just going to select hierarchy, and then we're going to pull it. Cool, and what we should see, if we come over here, is we should see the joint chain fall out of this and line up with the other one. Boom! Okay, cool. Everything's working nicely. Alright, so let's just Z back from that. Everything's following nice. Okay, so let's get into actually binding this. We don't actually need to see a lot of this stuff now. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to come over here. I would do this and select all of my binds through here. However, there are several binds in the scene that have already been done, so I don't want to do that. So we're just going to go over here, and there's a pretty easy way to do this. CT leaf bind, and we're going to just shift select there, and then we're going to grab this last. I'm going to go to skin, and I'm just going to show you my options. They're really simple. You know, selected joints, closest distant, classic linear, interactive, neighbors. Turn off maintain max influence. Just as a general rule, turn that off, and don't look at it anymore. If you're doing game rigs, I hear it's very helpful, but we're not doing a game rig, and even when you're doing game rigs, it can be detrimental. Just turn it off, especially if you don't know what it's about. Just that button is the devil. Anyways, we're going to bind, and I'm not going to get too much into weight painting here, but let's just take a look at what we're seeing. Maybe I should just have the icons here. Alright, cool. So we are in FK mode, so what is happening? Select hierarchy. Now we should see this thing move with it. It's cool. Like I said in the beginning, this is a project I'm actually doing for school, so these are going to have in cloth on them, and I don't want those to be affected right now, but for what we got going on, this is moving perfectly. Now what we need to do is see how it looks with the dynamics on it. And for that, we can just, let's grab here for the interactive playback. Oh, by the way, if you hold H and then click down, you guys will have a menu that shows you the different tabs up here. I actually replaced that with a custom, I guess, menu icon or whatever. So I have to go over here, but if you guys press H, you can find the In Dynamics tab that we're going to need. So grab over here, just grab whatever you're going to use. If you guys are using this for a tail or something, I'm using a cape, so I use the chest. But if you're using a tail, use the hip bone or something that makes sense. Each rig is different, but just know that like where it is and placement is very important. So anyways, we're gonna pivot from here. I'm gonna go to InSolver, interactive playback. Oh, that is nice. And we can move it, and we are getting some really nice stuff. Alright, cool. So another thing you want to keep in mind is that we can affect a few other properties of the dynamic. So let's go into, I believe it's still under leaf dynamics. We're going to find out. It's in here somewhere. Follicle shape. We are looking for hair system. There is a start curve attract that we are looking for. You guys probably saw it before I did. Let's open this back up. Dynamic properties. Start curve attract. Yep, it's under the hair shape system or hair system shape node, and this it goes 0 to 1. It is very sensitive. So you'll notice. Let's make sure that this is in the right place. Boom, we're in full dynamic. Perfect. So let's go back into the hair system shape node. Okay, so first things first, let's just do InSolver interactive playback. You'll notice it's just really, really loose, flowing in the wind. That's fine. That's something that we might want. But another thing you want to keep in mind, InSolver interactive playback. Nope. We want to come back over here. Is you can take this and let's use something like 0.3, and you can affect its stiffness. Like this is on top of the dynamic FK switch, because the dynamic are still going to flow if you have it like in between, like if this was like set to something like 5, then when you move the FK you'll get that like follow through for free. But you'll notice that when we pressed play it was just like dropping straight down. So now when we do our interactive playback, you should see that's a bit more stiff. Yeah, it's just very, very subtle. So now when you move the dynamics with the FK, you'll get a more subtle effect, and we can actually test it out right now. So let's just go like to number 5, grab this, select hierarchy, and we're just gonna do something like this. Grab there, boom, and now, ooh, let's just, whoa, it's a bit much. We're gonna affect this a bit lighter. Like I said, it's really sensitive. It only goes from 0 to 1, and clearly 0.3 made it really sticky. So let's try like 0.1, I mean. And honestly, let's just affect from here. So let's go InSolver. There we go. And then you'll get that slight motion as you're pulling it, and then the little ripples and stuff will be extremely subtle. So you kind of want to choose how you parent that or partner it with the whole FK switch and the start curve attract. Keeping it at 0 seems to be fine for what we're doing right now, but if this is just too loose for you guys and it's blowing everywhere, just know that you can tie this into an attribute too. Like maybe this could just be like stiffness right under switch, and you can really play with it, and it just gives you that extra level of control. So ultimately, that is the dynamic FK. When it comes to icons, we have this, and we definitely want to pop that back into our icons group, or under the COG maybe. Well, I'd put it under the chest, and that's under COG. Boom, center of gravity. And now we move it. Everything's moving fine. I mean, save the leaf tissue. And that's because that's going to have a different system on it. But yeah, it's integrated into the system pretty well. Oh yeah, that's squash and stretch. But that's another podcast. I will show you the whole squash and stretch thing. It's actually pretty interesting. But yeah, anyways, as far as we're concerned, this is the dynamic FK switch. I hope that was very clear. If you guys have any questions, I'm posting this. Feel free to comment, or if you have me on Facebook, send me a message. I'm always happy to help. So, good luck. Thanks for watching.